That ends general question time. We now move to First Minister's questions. Question number 1, Joanne Lamont.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister what engagements he has planned for the rest of the day.
First Minister.
Taking forward matters of importance to the people of Scotland.
Joanne Lamont.
Presiding Officer, these are tough times. People across Europe are fearful of what is going to happen if Greece defaults on its loans and leaves the Eurozone. The situation in Spain, Portugal and Italy is also looking increasingly perilous. If Greece leaves the euro, and others may follow, what are the First Minister's estimates of the impact on the Scottish economy?
First Minister.
Well, of course, it's precisely because of the seriousness of the situation that we've identified government time next week for a debate on exactly that subject. And the government will contribute our thoughts on the matter. I'm sure the Labour Party and other parties will contribute as well. Clearly, it's a very serious situation and a potentially very substantial implications for the UK and for the Scottish economy.
Joanne Lamont.
It would have been good if the First Minister could maybe have shared some of his thoughts now, since that was the question I asked him. The last time our banking sector hit crisis, a Labour government immediately rescued our banks so that ordinary families in this country could still get money out of their cash points, including Scottish banks, of course. No question, no hesitation, no negotiation. The kind of action the Greeks and the Irish can only dream of. Our banking system, saved by one of the most successful economic unions in history, the United Kingdom. Isn't the real lesson of the euro crisis that you cannot share a currency, you cannot have monetary union without a fiscal union and a political union?
First Minister.
Can I gently remind Joanne Lamont that the Governor of the Bank of England was in office during the period she talks about. Last week he published the most devastating assessment of the delay and dithering and in fact accused the last government's lack of action as being responsible for the depth of the recession. Now, if that's what the Governor of the Bank of England, who was in office when Alistair Darling was Chancellor and Gordon Brown was Prime Minister, says, then I don't think I have to add to that by pointing out that Labour's absolute responsibility for the depth of the recession is clear on the record and cannot be escaped by any member of the Labour Party. She says that a monetary union is inevitable to have carry with it a fiscal union. There's two totally different situations. We're talking in the euro about a situation where the productivity rates of Greece are about 40% below that of Germany. That creates huge difficulties and tensions within the euro area. And I think it would actually be better at this particular juncture if people came forward with positive ideas as to how to give an opportunity and hope for the people of Greece within that euro area, merely than capping from the sidelines, which is what seems to be done by the United Kingdom government. And I haven't, to be absolutely frank, heard anything from Ed Balls which gives a substantial argument as to how the Eurozone can be maintained in its current condition. So I hope when we come to the debate next Wednesday, Joanne Lamont will come not just with a bit of remembrance of the past and Labour's absolute responsibility for the mess this economy was in, but also some positive ideas for the future.
This, of course, is the man who said that the problem with the banking system was that it was over-regulated. But we also note that he refuses to confront the logic of his own position that the Bank of England would be the lender of last resort for a Scotland that was outside the United Kingdom. People in this country, people all around Europe, are looking for certainty and stability in an uncertain world. The First Minister used to say we needed a Scottish pound because interest rates set in London were bad for Scotland. Yet now that's what he advocates. He used to say we joined the euro because the pound was failing. Now, louder than William Hague ever did, he's saying keep the pound. I guess, consistency is a wonderful thing. Isn't the real reason the First Minister keeps changing the economic case for leaving the UK is because he can't find one that adds up?
First Minister.
What I heard the words consistency is a wonderful thing, the three words council tax freeze came to mind as far as the Labour Party is concerned. Can I just point out that Gordon Brown, the former Labour Prime Minister, actually argued that there should be no touch regulation of the financial sector. In a speech, he actually argued that position. The Labour Party were in favour of entering the euro. We're going to have a referendum when Tony Blair was Prime Minister to consolidate that position. So I really think lectures on economic consistency with regard to the euro area coming from the Labour Party absolutely takes the biscuit in terms of this chamber. I think it will be of huge, substantial assistance to the Scottish economy if we have fiscal control. That is, we control the taxes and resources of Scotland and have the ability to manage our economy on that basis. That is a strong position that independence will give us, and no other option seems to be available that could offer that position. For example, I would have thought right now there is, despite Alistair Darling's position of wanting cuts which were tougher and deeper than those of Margaret Thatcher, I thought there would be agreement now between the SNP and the Labour Party that direct capital spending is necessary to revive our economy at the present moment. And we have been articulating that case, along with our Labour colleagues in the Government of Wales, trying to convince the Chancellor in London that that is the right mechanism to do right now to revive this economy. Wouldn't it be better if we as a Parliament could just decide to get on and do it with independence instead of having to go cap in hand to UK Tory Chancellors?
Joanne Lamont. Order. Joanne Lamont.
Instead of the First Minister giving us his greatest hits in lines of not answering the question, he should take responsibility and reflect on what is happening in Europe just now, what consequences it will have for Scotland. The reality is, now, the fact of the matter is, we have all heard that the First Minister is planning a big day out at the pictures tomorrow. For many of us, the cinema is a form of escapism. But evidently, for the First Minister, his economics is escapism. Europe is facing the greatest economic crisis since the Depression. And instead of looking up his address book under E for economists, he's looking up C for celebrities. Makes a change, I suppose, from dialling M for Murdoch. Scots, like people across Europe. This is a serious business. Scots, like people across Europe, fear what is going to happen to them if the Eurozone collapses. But the First Minister's message to them is, turn off the news, put down the paper, nothing to worry about. I think we know now what we'll be showing at the multiplex at Fountain Bridge tomorrow. Alex in Wonderland.
First Minister. Order.
I just hope by the time John Lamont gets to the debate next Wednesday called in government time so this Parliament can address seriously a hugely serious issue, she's got something more to say than she's managed this afternoon. The economy is a huge abiding concern for this government. That's why we work day and daily to bring jobs to Scotland. We take some satisfaction in recent employment figures rising in Scotland and unemployment figures falling, but we take no complacency in that, which is why we're calling for the direct investment in the shovel-ready projects around Scotland, and why we make the case for having control over the fiscal levers of this economy, which can only now come with independence. But I have to say, the idea that we are the only party planning and getting arrangements made for a constitutional debate seems to me rather wide of the mark. Because I read in the Mail on Sunday, the first time I'd ever read that newspaper, that senior aides to David Cameron took part in a secret all-party council of war at former Labour Chancellor Alistair Darling's Edinburgh home. The 6 men spent 3 hours discussing their battle plans at the meeting held a month ago at Mr Darling's home at Abersworth Park area that has become their unofficial headquarters. Fortified by tea and sandwiches, they agreed that the only way to defeat Mr.
I think we get the gist, First Minister. Could you just get to that?
described as the abbots for the corn. If that's what the No campaign have got to offer, then the campaign launched tomorrow will be fundamentally successful.
Question number 2, Ruth Davidson. If the First Minister is looking to see what's on at the Cineworld tomorrow, Dark Shadows and The Dictator are playing, just for his own personal knowledge. But I'll ask the First Minister when he'll next meet the Secretary of State for Scotland. First Minister.
No plans, near future.
Ruth Davidson. 2 years ago, this SNP government withdrew its commitment to publicly fund the new Sick Kids Hospital in Edinburgh. Yesterday, NHS Lothian confirmed that the project has been delayed yet again. Not for the first, not for the second, but for the 5th time. The Health Secretary approved the plans which promised us a new Sick Kids completed by early next year. Will the First Minister tell us when the doors will actually open at a new children's hospital facility in Edinburgh? First Minister.
Can I say that the full bouquet of absurdity of that question is based on the fact that a government in London which cuts the direct capital budget by 30%, and then calls for direct capital investment has a credibility gap as wide as the River Forth. We're looking at the non-profit distribution model to build the Sick Kids Hospital. That hospital will be built. The NPD programmes inevitably, because of their nature, take time, but the commitment is there from the government. But if the Conservative Party and the Liberal Democrats wish to see a direct capital investment plan to help the Sick Kids Hospital and other direct projects in the National Health Service, then restore the capital cuts that have been taken by the Chancellor in London.
Ruth Davidson. No, these excuses don't work. This government promised a hospital. The hospital hasn't been built. And I can tell the First Minister, I can tell him that the date now projected has slipped to 2017. But the sad truth is that the chair of NHS Lothian yesterday reported that they're now being forced to prepare a plan B to keep the hospital at the old site. Now, I have a personal interest in this. I am one of the many thousands of people across Scotland whose life was saved by the specialist care they received at the Sick Kids Hospital in Edinburgh. And I know how beloved the old Sheens building is. However, the limitations of the site, the age of the building and its distance from an acute emergency hospital means that this facility is no longer suitable to provide the world-class care that our children deserve into the future. Plan B is not good enough. Plan A has slipped 5 times on the First Minister's watch. This government cannot sit on its hands and let this project fall apart because it's too important.
It's in the report.
So,
it's in the report. Read it.
Will the First Minister
Read it.
Will the First Minister now show the political leadership that patients and their families expect? Will he make this a political priority? Will he bring all the power the government has to bear to get the players round the table, to get the bricks laid, to get the doors open and to get the children treated by 2017?
First Minister. When we've had debates on capital spending, the Conservative Party have said, what about the budget consequentials, which have increased the Scottish Government's budget? So I asked the officials to prepare the government's capital budget, adding on the consequentials from the last autumn statement and the last budget. In 2010-11, including these consequentials, the capital budget allocated to the Scottish Government was $3,293,000,000. In 2014-15, that falls to $2,489,000,000, a cut of almost 30%. So a party in government at Westminster which imposes a 30% capital cut and then calls for a capital investment directly across the country is guilty of the most overwhelming hypocrisy. The alternative to keep our commitments to the people of Scotland, which indeed we shall keep, speaking as another ex-patient of the Sick Kids Hospital in Edinburgh, is to go for non-profit distribution funding. Securing non-profit distribution funding inevitably takes time, but it shall be done. And the capital programme in the National Health Service in Scotland is infinitely superior to what's happening south of the border, and just occasionally Ruth Davison and our colleagues should take a glance at the decimation of the National Health Service in England, which will never happen as long as we're in government in Scotland.
McInnes.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The First Minister will be aware of the plight of Mr Ken Maitland from Aberdeen. Suffering from dementia, he died earlier this month. His wife revealed last weekend that he had had 106 different carers in 1 year. And sadly, that's not the only case of a multitude of different carers trooping in and out of someone's home. In 2009, the Scottish Government made dementia a national priority and drew up a charter of rights for people, saying, "I have the right to be regarded as a unique individual and to be treated with dignity and respect." Does the First Minister agree with me that Mr Maitland's care package failed to treat him with dignity and respect? Something has gone badly wrong in the way home care is provided. Will the First Minister therefore instruct his Health Secretary to take stock of the situation across Scotland and issue new, stricter guidelines that ensure councils and care agencies provide proper, person-centred care plans with a particular focus on continuity of care?
First Minister.
Let me say, I heard Mrs Maitland articulate the case on the radio, and I thought she did so with great dignity under the circumstances. Clearly, the situation facing her husband was completely unsatisfactory. But I disagree with Alice McInnes. I don't think this is a case of publishing new guidelines. I think this is much more a case of looking to two things. That's the integration of health and social care, which should help enormously in the management of home care cases. And secondly, of course, the legislation which we are about to pass, which will entrench patients' rights in the rule of law and give people the options of commanding their own care package. So I would look for the integration of social care and the legislative basis for action to protect parents rather than just the issuing of guidelines.
James Donlan.
The First Minister will be aware of the recent announcement of 90 job losses planned at the Clyde Union pumps plant in my constituency. Can I ask what discussions the Scottish Government has had with Clyde Union pumps surrounding these job losses, and if he agrees with me that, given the company's 125-year history with the community of Cathcart, new owners SPX should consider seriously the wishes of former owner Jim McCall when he sold the company to SPX, that they continue to be good, responsible owners who will support the company's growth and see their employees go on and prosper?
First Minister.
Well, I share the member's concern about the announcement by SPX that around 90 jobs to be lost at Clyde Union Pumps in Cathcart, and of course the impact this will have on the employees affected and their families. I can confirm we've acted immediately to provide assistance through the PACE initiative. On Tuesday of this week, the Glasgow PACE team met with the company to discuss support for employees who may be facing redundancy. And I can assure the member that PACE will provide as much support as possible to the employees to minimise the time these individuals are affected by redundancy and are out of work.
Question number 3, Willie Rennie.
To ask the First Minister what issues will be discussed at the next meeting of the Cabinet.
First Minister.
Issues of importance to the people of Scotland.
Willie Rennie.
The First Minister will have seen an open letter from 40 leading figures calling for a Scottish public inquiry into the Lockerbie prosecution. They have made it clear they want a Scottish inquiry, whether there is an appeal or not. This is about the Scottish Government's Criminal Case Review Commission identifying 6 grounds for an appeal, including the conduct of the Crown Office, withheld evidence and doubt about the identification. The First Minister has previously said he would be prepared to cooperate with a UK inquiry. If he has no objection to an inquiry in principle, and this group wants a Scottish inquiry, will he agree to hold one?
First Minister.
Well, the place where you determine guilt or innocence of an individual is in a court of law. And as Willie Rennie should know, the relatives of Mr McGrahy have the ability, as if they so choose, to go back to the Scottish Criminal Case Review Commission and seek further leave to appeal. And that is the process which can be followed. And I suspect that the Parliament would do well to take the view. It's not just the best place to determine guilt or innocence, it's the only place to determine guilt or innocence. I also think Willie Rennie's description of the SCCRC report, the Scottish Criminal Case Review Commission is part and parcel of the Scottish judicial system. It exists to provide checks and balances in the system. It's the right and it's proper for the SCCRC to refer, if it thinks there is reason to do so, cases back to the Court of Appeal. That does not automatically mean that these cases would be successful on appeal. It should look at the record to see that. And the other thing I think you should note, in fairness, about the SCCRC report, is across that report, now we've seen the full detail, which for many years I've campaigned for to be published, as he well knows, we can see that basically the forensic trail which led to Malta and to Libya was upheld in that exhaustive review by the SCCRC, something which is not always clear in the reporting of that report.
Bill Rennie.
Thank the First Minister for that answer, but this is not just about guilt or innocence. It's also about the conduct of the Crown Office. And surely in a liberal society, we should be prepared to look hard at its justice system, even if it's worried about what it might find. And surely it can't just be left in the hands of a family somewhere in Tripoli for that to be determined. If he chooses to act on this inquiry, he'd have the support of Desmond Tutu, Terry Waite, John Pilger and so many others. This is not a normal case. It's Scotland's biggest terrorist atrocity. These are serious questions raised by serious people, and the world is watching. Will he act?
First Minister.
Well, can I just point out that I've got absolutely no axe to grind as far as the Crown Office is concerned back 10 years ago. This government weren't in office then. There's no reason for me to be reasonably protective of law officers and Lord Advocates and members of the Crown Office for 10 years ago. But the basis on which you proceed is to see if the appeals are exhausted within the system. And it's not just a matter to shrug aside and say it shouldn't be up to the family of Mr McGrahy to go back to the SCCRC. That is the process of Scots law. That's what the SCCRC is there to do. And we've every reason to suppose, given the exhaustive nature of the SCCR report, of the evidence that they compiled, the witness statements they took over a period of years, that they will do their job properly, as they clearly have done. But please remember, this is part and parcel of our judicial system. This is not something outside the judicial system. The SCCRC is part of the judicial system. And let me repeat, the place to determine guilt or innocence of an individual, and the people he's cited genuinely believe that Mr al-Megrahi was innocent. That's what they believe. That's why they're arguing that case. The place to determine guilt or innocence is in a court of law. Other people want inquiry into Lockerbie. They're not looking for an inquiry into the points in the SCCR report. They're looking to inquiry into the responsibility ultimately for Lockerbie. That touches on matters of huge international import, which would be beyond the ability of a Scottish inquiry to summon witnesses, to compel evidence, etc., which is why we've said clearly that we'd cooperate with any such inquiry. But the case to determine the guilt or innocence of Mr McGrahy is in a court of law, and the process by which that possibly could be done, and that is a matter for the SCCRC, which is an independent body, if such an application comes forward. That is the process by which things can be properly pursued.
Question number 4, Kenneth Gibson.
To ask the First Minister what impact the continuing uncertainty in the Eurozone is having on the Scottish economy.
First Minister.
Well, it's important to recognise that employment in Scotland is rising and unemployment falling, both at a faster rate across the UK as a whole. This week's Bank of Scotland Labour Market Barometer showed the 18th month of improvement in the Scottish labour market, and it was a highly satisfactory finding. But the recovery, as we've said many times, remains fragile. Action is required to boost growth, create job opportunities, with around 45% of Scots' international export destined for European markets. An end to ongoing uncertainty, a strong recovery in Europe is important, not just for the Scottish economy, but for the global economic recovery.
Kenneth Gibson.
I thank the First Minister for his reply. The UK coalition government, which controls macroeconomic policy, has now matched the previous Labour government by leading the UK back into recession. Although continuing Eurozone uncertainty has impacted on both Scotland and the UK, does the First Minister agree that with the UK in double dip and with the worst economic performance since the recession of any UK country excluding Italy, this is clear evidence of the negative impact of UK economic policies? And will the First Minister again call on the coalition government to abandon its austerity at all costs approach lest its actions continue to jeopardise Scottish economic recovery? And does he agree with former Bank of Scotland officials Howard Davis and Marion Bell, who said that the markets recognise that if the economy turns out weaker than expected, you try to compensate by tightening further, then that way madness lies?
First Minister.
Yes, I do agree with that, because it's important. Because it's important to recognise at a time where even the International Monetary Fund is calling for an alternative approach to combat recession, that it's high time the Chancellor of the Exchequer recognised the role of direct capital investment in stimulating the economy. As this chamber knows, I've made that case many, many times, but I'm pleased at least to see there are some converts to the cause, because even if Labour members here don't recognise their absolute responsibility for the current plight of the economy, they may have noticed last week the comments of Nick Pearce, Gordon Brown's head of policy at Number 10, calling for exactly a major capital investment programme, but admitting in the same quote that the cut, by the way, was a decision of the last Labour government which the coalition inherited. So to register this is not to make partisan points. Oh, that we could have such admission and honesty from the Labour benches in this Parliament.
Gavin Brown.
Maybe time for a supplementary that the First Minister hasn't seen in advance of the question. Given the substantial implications for the Scottish economy, can the First Minister tell us how many times has his Council of Economic Advisers met since the Eurozone crisis reared its head again a few weeks ago, and when are they next scheduled to meet?
First Minister.
Well, the Council of Economic Advisers has met twice since the election. It's not the job of the Council of Economic Advisers. Meets 3 times a year. They provide ongoing substantial advice on substantive routes forward. They're comprised of some of the greatest economies in the world. And can I say to Gavin Brown, I wouldn't need notice to answer his questions.
Question number 5, Graham Pearson.
Thank you. To ask the First Minister what progress is being made with the ongoing criminal investigation of the Lockerbie bombing. First Minister.
Well, as Graham Pearson, of all people, will know, that criminal investigation and prosecution are conducted independently by the Crown Office and Police. I'm informed that the investigation into the involvement of others with Mr Al Megrahi into the bombing of Pan Am 103, that case has not been closed, of course. It's a live criminal inquiry, and the Crown is working with Dumfries and Galloway Constabulary and the US authorities to pursue all available lines of inquiry. An international letter of request was issued by the Lord Advocate to the new Libyan authorities in February of this year to allow the investigation to proceed in Libya itself. The letter of request details the specific lines of inquiry which law enforcement officers are interested in. The Lord Advocate travelled to Tripoli in April of this year to meet with the interim Libyan Prime Minister and the Minister for Justice to discuss and encourage that cooperation with Scottish law enforcement officers. It's a live criminal inquiry. It wouldn't be appropriate to comment further on the investigation itself, but I can say to Mr Pearson that we have every confidence to believe that the new Libyan authorities will cooperate fully with the inquiry.
Graham Pearson.
I thank the First Minister for that reply and note his earlier replies in this matter and his continued declaration to open government. Would he be surprised to know that following my unanswered questions in this chamber on 29 February, I wrote to the Cabinet Secretary for Justice to request specific facts about his visit to Greenock Prison, the meeting between departmental officials and Libyan representatives, and his view of a possible conflict of interest in these matters. In spite of repeated reminders, I had to wait for 70 days and finally submit an additional FOI request before receiving a refusal of my request within hours. How does the First Minister intend to repair the damage done to Scotland's reputation for justice and good governance if he cannot demonstrate the accountability of his government to this Parliament and the members in this chamber?
First Minister.
I think Graham Pearson should know, certainly before he entered the chamber, nonetheless, all relevant documents were published on the web by the Scottish Government in August 2009, including all information that could be disclosed. That's in marked contrast, of course, to the decisions of the Labour Government at Westminster, because it's only with the publication of Gus O'Donnell's report on the 7th of February 2011 that we found out that policy, that's United Kingdom Government policy, was progressively developed that Her Majesty's Government should do all that it could, while respecting devolved competences, to facilitate an appeal by the Libyans to the Scottish Government for Mr Megrahi's transfer under the PTA or release on compassionate grounds. Such an approach was understood across all relevant government departments. So while the Labour Party in this chamber were attacking the Justice Secretary, their colleagues in London were campaigning for Mr Megrahi's release on any grounds.
Question number 6, Nigel Dawn.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister what the Scottish Government's position is regarding reports that the Ministry of Defence might have sold land in Scotland that was contaminated with radioactive material.
First Minister.
The Cabinet Secretary for the Environment recently wrote to the UK Defence Secretary urging the Ministry of Defence to make available all necessary information on any such land that may be potentially contaminated to SEPA, the agency, of course, that's responsible for regulating this in Scotland. We understand that assessments to identify any such contamination at RAF Kinloss and other MOD sites are ongoing. It is vital that the MOD cooperate with SEPA to ensure that local communities can be provided with peace of mind as quickly as possible.
Nigel Dawn.
I thank the First Minister for that response. Does he agree with me that the MOD really must learn the lesson of Dalgety Bay? They really must investigate all current and former sites in Scotland, and they should be free with the information that they discover for the benefit of our local communities.
First Minister.
Well, I think lessons should be learned from the radioactive contamination issue at Dalgety Bay. That contamination was first detected in the early 1990s, and yet it's only in the last few months that we've seen the MOD take the necessary steps to begin the full-scale investigation. It was left to SEPA to identify and remove the high-activity particles last year in Dalgety Bay rather than the MOD, and that example shows the MOD have been dragging their feet on that issue for far too long. So I would call on the MOD to carry out its investigations at other sites in Scotland in a prompt, comprehensive and transparent manner, cooperating fully with the regulatory authorities in Scotland and the affected communities. Only by doing that can they regain the confidence and trust of the people in these communities.
That ends First Minister's question time. I now suspend until 2 p.m.